Welcome in, everyone. I'm the real John, and I can't even put up a front. This year has started off the worst for me since 2014, which was the year where my mental health was so bad I had to go back to a psychologist I saw in my teens because he was somebody I already had a rapport with, and I needed to see somebody because the me no longer alive ideations were at their worst. Side note, can I just say how much I can't stand that the corporatized internet has led us to self-inflict with our own Orwellian doublespeak to get around getting buried by algorithms to appease advertisers who say and show way worse than what we're doing? But that's an entirely separate tangent. The point is that this year already sucks and I need to let off some steam. So, let's hook rocks at some bad movies. Same format as last year, and in the last video, some dishonorable mentions, then 14 rotten corn kernels in the pig slop before getting into the king of the trash heap. Let's get this over with. Dear and Projector Lights, worst movies of 2025. Dishonorable Mentions. Some of these weren't bad enough to make the list proper, and some were just because I had to make a cutoff at some point. I'm also going to say it now, more popularly dunked on movies from last year, like a Minecraft movie, Smurfs, and Snow White, were originally going to end up here, but weren't bad enough to make the cut, even for the dishonorable mentions. Yep, that's how bad things got. I'll fully admit, I don't like the Conjuring series. Namely because it completely whitewashes the Warrens from being the charlatans that they actually are into being some kind of heroic figures against the forces of evil. That said, this final entry wasn't going to be on the list at all when I first watched it. It managed to have more of a point dealing with the Warrens losing cachet and public interest in their supernatural dealings in the 80s than doing the whole trope of one last job, this time with their daughter and her boyfriend turned fiance, and it was honestly better than the last two movies were. And then it got to the end title cards, talking about the final days of the Warrens, and it blamed the scientific community for never taking them seriously.
Oh, wait, you serious? Let me laugh even harder.
Look, you were well enough whitewashing these con artists. Don't try to bring down the rest of us for not buying into their bullshit too. Fuck you right back, movie. This honestly was never going to end up on the list proper just because it's not nearly as bad as the rest of the movies you're going to see. But it at least deserves a mention for being bad, even for jingoistic oorah propaganda. If you missed this, you didn't miss anything for one, but the premise is an American military unit goes down in North Korea and has to fight their way back through the demilitarized zone to South Korea. Now, admittedly, I know next to nothing about the KDMZ, but I feel like with how many soldiers and civilians, both Korean and American, that get killed during all of this, there would absolutely be more of an international incident made from what happened in this movie. But also, this movie is too incompetent to even handle the nuances there, and they probably just picked the location because North Korea is one of the last quote-unquote enemies for the US where we faced possible open conflict, until a third of our population elected that good old peace-loving president who decided we needed more open conflicts around the globe, but I digress. Back to this military-grade slop, when you get to the actual military stuff, it's truly bottom of the barrel. Like, it follows every trope in the book to the point that you could literally cold read this movie and predict every single plot moment beat for beat. When it comes to movies like that, usually the filmmaking or the cast can make up for that. But this movie is so cheap and lazy that it's basically just finishing its homework last minute and turning it in so they don't get a 0. Even for the guns blasting, red, white, and blue bleeding true American patriots, I think y'all can do better. This actually stuck around on my list proper for a good while through 2025 until more entries started getting added later in the year. Because for as bad as it is, it's ultimately just a badly done drama about a mother-daughter relationship ravaged by drug addiction. It had the potential to be better and fumbled it. Compared to what you'll see on the list proper, this is nothing. You know, back in the day, Tyler Perry used to make it on my list proper, but even with how much he churns out every year, his 2 worst movies could only manage to be dishonorable mentions this past year. Don't get me wrong, he's still a trash filmmaker who's basically become a content mill for his built-in audience, that I can only imagine is finally starting to shrink with all the diminishing returns they get from him, hopefully. But there's far bigger fish to fry from 2025. This was the last movie from the list proper to be edged out, which is fair because it's ultimately just a mediocre romance movie with a really terrible twist of an ending. Seriously, fuck last-minute cancer twists. They're for lazy hacks. Spoilers, I guess, but you shouldn't see this movie anyway. Another contender for the list proper that got bumped down, this completely unnecessary sequel takes whatever there was good about the last movie and just gives a rote by-the-numbers action movie shot on the cheap in Europe with a completely incomprehensible plot. And then they teased a part 3 at the end, so I can only imagine how much worse the next one's gonna be. How romantic. Look, I may be asexual, but I'm not completely aromantic. I can get into romantic stories, and I've been getting into them more and more recently. I've been slowly getting into things like My Dress Up Darling, and with you I'll get through this from the various clips that Crunchyroll put on YouTube. I get all mushy and sweet inside when I see friends or the VTubers that I follow in relationships with their partners do all kinds of cute couple things. In the time it took me to record this, I saw Emerald Farrell's Wuthering Heights, and I enjoyed it quite a bit, even if it's not quite like the book at all. And I also watched through Heated Rivalry, which, while I didn't personally love it, I appreciated it, and I can say it's a very good romantic drama. My point is that I'm not averse to romance or romantic movies and media. It's the shitty ones that I'm averse to. Look, I know Amy Schumer's show was all right when it came out, and Trainwreck is pretty funny too, but I think now that a decade has passed, we need to recognize that Schumer herself wasn't why either of those were any good. If anything, Schumer brings down whatever she's in because she isn't as funny as we thought she was, or she probably still thinks she is. And that's not even going into how awful she is off screen. But hey, apparently Adam Sandler still felt like working with her, so why not tell a romantic comedy about pretending to be pregnant?
That's the joke.
The thing is, I am usually willing to give the benefit of the doubt for some movies. A bad-sounding premise could absolutely work in the right circumstances. The original Overboard has a really icky premise, as proven when they tried to remake it even with the gender swap. But that original worked due to its execution and the absolutely palpable charisma between Kurt Russell and Goldie Hawn. So in the right hands, a story about a woman pretending to be pregnant and then meeting her perfect partner could work. The problem is this is Happy Madison and Amy Schumer. So these were terrible hands to try and handle this or any other premise. I think the real kicker is that this premise completely hinges on the idea that pregnant women get treated better than non-pregnant women who aren't conventionally attractive. And I'm sure you can absolutely find certain instances and anecdotal evidence where that could be the case, But even as a cis man, I'm well aware of the hurdles and plights pregnant people face, not just personally, but socially. If this movie could have taken the opportunity to address more of those issues, this could have actually had a point to it. But no, it cares more about focusing on Amy Schumer's character being an asshole to pretty much everyone around her until she's alienated them all and she comes back hat in hand to say, "I sorry," and everything's just fine. Sorry, but Will Forte deserves better than a piece of shit like that. So this one's probably just me. From everything I saw, more people dug this movie than I did. But I'm sorry, no matter how subversive this intended to be, no matter how much it addresses real aspects of toxic relationships, I hated having to sit through this. This movie is less on here for its themes and entirely on here for its execution, particularly the dialogue writing, acting, and the direction of that acting. I found nobody likable in this movie. The protagonist, the toxic boyfriend, the best friends, everyone in this movie is the worst. This movie just turned me into Kendrick singing Euphoria. I hate the way that you talk, the way that you walk, the way that you dress. But that's just me, I guess. Some shit just cringeworthy. It ain't even gotta be deep, I guess. At the same time, I do have to admit this one was probably never going to hit as hard for me, because for one thing, this was made for a female audience in mind particularly, and particularly one that had experience with toxic relationships. Meanwhile, I'm, as I mentioned, an asexual cisgender guy who hasn't had any long-term relationships, let alone dated since high school for like, I think I dated for like a month before the person decided to move on from me, and I haven't dated anybody since. I don't even know if she would call that dating. I don't even call like I think what we did was technically go out on dates, but I don't think we were what you would call, we wouldn't be dating, you know? It's one of those cases. So I digress, but the point being that, this wasn't made for me in mind. I never had any kind of long-term relationship, or let alone one with the kind of toxic personality as depicted in this movie. So the themes that are being tackled here aren't as meaningful to me without that shared experience. And the themes alone aren't enough to overcome how absolutely cloying I found every one of these characters. I also admit this could just as easily be some kind of regional or generational difference. I may just be too old or too suburban for this style of talking or humor. One of the main filmmakers behind this was Larry David's daughter. Maybe that's just a thing that she picked. Maybe that's the way she and her friends talk. I may have just officially reached the point of out of touch status as a guy at 37. Whatever the case, I would sooner dip my head in acid than sit through this movie or listen to anyone from it speak ever again. Everywhere, everything. Oh, Colleen Hoover, what hell hath you wrought for us now? While I gave her last movie, It Ends With Us, some leniency and grace after hearing that there were apparently some women who were helped by it showing the earlier signs of abuse in a relationship, this latest one isn't getting any such treatment. This is abject nonsense. I mean, at this point, I have to ask, is Colleen Hoover's fandom mostly ironic? Like, are people enjoying her stuff because it's bad? Because that I can kind of understand. I've definitely dipped my toes into the so bad they're good type of film, and I can understand if you enjoy this because you can make fun of it. I personally cannot comprehend liking any of this genuinely, though. So, while the third rail of abuse isn't featured in this movie, the whole plot around the brother and sister dying because they were cheating is just handled so trashily. Like, you know how normal people would have handled this news? Aw, man, really? That sucks. Man, what the fuck? And that's it. End scene. That's it. They get on with their lives after that. Sure, it would obviously still come up and there'd be some animosity about it, but they handled it by talking with their loved ones and friends and therapists. They'd otherwise just keep going about their lives. But this movie does so much hand wringing and hemming and hawing over it, wasting so much time keeping secrets from each other for no reason. Just so when things are revealed, somebody can storm off in a huff. It's absolutely cartoonish. See, this is why we need more therapists, people. And universal mental health care, obviously. Give Colleen Hoover this. She didn't make the worst romance story adapted to a movie last year. No, that honor goes to Jay Crownover's Marked Men series, which somehow got the director of John Q, Nick Cassavetes, to adapt this slop. Marked Men, if you've managed to miss this series, seems to be another run-of-the-mill Harlequin romance series of books about straight-edge girls falling head over heels for tattooed bad boys with a dark past, I guess. And the first entry, simply called Rule, had its title expanded for the more mainstream audience who wouldn't have heard of this shit. So we have the name of the book series, the name of the bad boy and the book, a plus sign, and the name of the straight edge protagonist girl. Brilliant work there, marketing team. A plus, no notes. Genuinely, I don't have any idea how Nick Cassavetes ended up here. This is direct-to-video slop at best that had a limited theatrical run before I caught it on Hulu, and the dude was still making legitimate movies before this. This can't have paid that well, but he was the biggest name attached to it, so maybe he's where the majority of their budget went, I guess? However he got here, he may as well have sleptwalked through the whole production. This is complete garbage from beginning to end. An absolute convoluted mess. A rat king of every bad romance trope you could imagine, except for one really weird trope subversion. You see, Rule, the dark and brooding bad boy who's not good enough for our heroine, also constantly gets his ass kicked by the douchebag abusive boyfriend turned ex-boyfriend character. Like, normally the brooding bad boy love interest would be the one to kick the douchebag's ass out of anger and protection for mistreating the woman that he loves. But in this story, the revenge ass kicking is done instead by a third mutual friend character who's ex-military, as if they needed a reason someone was tough enough to beat up the douchebag, and they couldn't have given that backstory to the love interest? I guess that's one way to say support our troops, but I don't think the vets are going to be all that impressed by this tribute. In any case, if you want a so bad it's good romance movie that can also tout being from the director of The Notebook, god damn it, that's probably the only reason they shelled out for Nick Cassavetes, isn't it? Then give this a run and see if it's a good fit for your bad movie night. But otherwise, I gotta put up the yellow floor sign and warn everybody to steer clear. Streaming service slop. As streaming services took over the entertainment industry, they kind of became the de facto place for everything from TV movies to mid-tier budget releases, the ones between $10 million and $100 million it costs to make, to direct-to-video stuff, to the occasional blockbuster that a studio didn't believe in. So the qualities will vary wildly. Sometimes on streaming you may get a K-pop Demon Hunters or a Wake Up Dead Man. Or you might get shit like these.
We're gonna have to toughen you up, Nino.
Oh good, you're back. So I've got beef with Disney when it comes to this IP. Namely because said kids book was one of my favorites growing up. It's a very simple story about a kid having one of those days where everything seems to go wrong to the point where he's convinced himself that he should run away to Australia. Fun fact, it's Timbuktu in Australian printings for the book, only to have his mom help him remember that bad days happen no matter where you are, but that's okay. It really helped a baby autistic me who would often get hung up on things going a certain way or catastrophize when things went wrong. And Disney just shat all over that with this now series of movies. That first movie was bad enough, making it about some kind of magical curse that Alexander somehow passes on to his family. But now we've got an entirely separate, unrelated family. And rather than adapt some of Judith Viorst's other stories featuring Alexander, they literally just do a road trip movie. It's every road trip movie you've ever seen before, except now all of the things going wrong aren't because of some bad luck on Alexander's part, but because of a goddamn Brady Bunch in Hawaii grade tiki subplot. Yep, we're digging that one up from the mothballs. We've just completely lost the whole point of talking about Alexander's terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day, haven't we? They also did a race swap and had Alexander's family be Hispanic this time around, but that has nothing to do why the movie sucks. If anything, the bits about Hispanic culture, and particularly the parts dealing with the fact that they're second generation Mexican Americans seeing and being in Mexico for the first time, those are some of the only highlights for the movie, and some of the best parts it has going for it. Too bad the movie couldn't have been more about that without needing to be some kind of stupid corporate tie-in that's completely unrelated. This is pretty much the Dirty Dancing Havana Nights problem all over again, but for kids. For the uninitiated, Dirty Dancing Havana Nights has literally nothing to do with the original Dirty Dancing. It's more about a Cuban dance instructor. It just literally has Dirty Dancing slapped onto it to get more people to see it. And so it's basically, so yeah, that's why I'm saying that's how I'm relating it to this movie. It's a movie that would have had its own interesting subplot dealing with Hispanic culture and Hispanic characters, but no, we got to slap something for the gringos to identify with, apparently, and that's a brand name. Thanks, Disney. I think more than anything, it's the missed opportunity that hurts the most with this one. If you missed this Amazon original, it co-stars their version of Jack Reacher, Alan Ritchson, and he isn't that awful in it. If anything, he reminded me a lot of the comedic roles that I've seen from Chris Hemsworth, with really great himbo energy. It got me interested in checking him out as Reacher, if nothing else. Unfortunately, Richson is paired with the comedic version of a black hole that is Kevin James, who even without Adam Sandler is just an unfunny slob of a man. Give this role to 90% of other comedians working right now, and you'd easily have improved the movie. But with Kevin James, there's not even one-liners or punchlines. It's just this. Just this picture of him shrugging for 100 minutes. That's it. Richson is giving it 110%, and James can barely be bothered to try for 5. Granted, I can't say I blame Kevin for not giving it his all. This movie is dumb even by action comedy standards. Characters are introduced and immediately leave the movie. The whole secret behind Richardson's son is completely predictable. Then when it's revealed, it's done sloppily, and they just wipe the slate clean rather than even bother trying to have a meaningful ending for the movie. Because why bother trying when you can just say fuck it? Well, you know what? If the movie can say fuck it, so can I. Fuck this. I'm out. Oh no, Gendy, buddy, what are you doing? Apparently, Gendy Tartakovsky, creator of Dexter's Laboratory, Samurai Jack, and Primal, has been wanting to make something akin to this premise for the last decade. Basically, a dog road comedy with one of the characters about to be neutered. And I've been there, man. I've had plans for creative endeavors that have languished in development hell for years upon years, but man, whenever someone decides to do quote unquote adult animation, it's always the most juvenile shit imaginable. You know what this reminds me of? John K's attempt to reboot Ren and Stimpy for Spike TV. When you're left without any kind of guardrails in place and allowed to be as, quote, adult as you want, that usually leads the creators to return to a 13-year-old mentality. The lowest bar for sex and body humor, random references to genitalia or sex acts just for the shock value. It's like everyone reverts back to being kids and laughing because they heard naughty words for the first time. Another bad thing this reminded me of was that movie Strays. Oddly enough, Strays managed to be more watchable just by not going nearly as off the rails as Fixed does. But it's still the same problem. Someone thought dogs and sex jokes were enough to carry a comedy, and they were wrong. Thankfully, Gendy is talented enough as an animation director and creator that he's perfectly allowed to have some stinkers in his catalog. At the time of making this video, Primal Season 3 came out, and that's more of a return to form for him, even if it's not as good as the previous two seasons in my book. So even when it comes to the greats in this industry, nobody's nerfed. Ah, yes, here we go. You know, this was going to be my worst movie of the year right up until the end. Wait until you see what managed to top it. Bottom it? Question mark? Phrasing? In any case, I don't know what more can be said about this movie that hasn't already been said at length by people who have seen it. This 5-year shelved slop is an absolute hack job of a mid-COVID lockdown production that barely resembles its source material. The screen recording feels more like a way to keep the movie cheap than to make use of that format. The acting is so flat and wooden you could use it for flooring, though I doubt it could hold anybody's weight. The attempt to modernize it are lazy at best, and the whole thing is a pathetic extended commercial for Amazon. There, I just saved you from watching the whole movie. You're welcome. Are we scared yet? While this year saw way more horror movies that I enjoyed, there were still plenty that reminded me why it's not my favorite genre. One thing to know about me is I am long past done with killer shark movies. I think the damage Jaws has done to actual shark populations has been more than enough reason to be done with this subgenre, and that even from a filmmaking standpoint, nothing has come even remotely close to Jaws in terms of quality. So to keep perpetuating the idea of killer man-eating sharks in movies is, at least in my mind, unethical, if not completely amoral. Thankfully, there have been some filmmakers trying to break away from that whole trope. Last year, we did have the excellent Australian slasher movie Dangerous Animals, which had Jai Courtney using hapless female tourists as shark bait, with the clear distinction that it was him who was the killer and not the sharks. Last year also brought us this sad attempt at something similar, where a team of treasure hunters are held hostage by drug runners who lost a shipment in the same area of the ocean and ordered the treasure hunters to dive down and retrieve their drugs. But oh no, the drugs and the treasure are in shark-infested waters, and the protagonist is still afraid of sharks after seeing her dad killed by a really poorly done CGI shark in her childhood. But you see, it's not the sharks who are the dangerous thing she needs to worry about.
It turns out it's man.
Now, you see, when the drug retrieval goes terribly because, water damage and shark-infested waters, the lead drug smuggler decides to just torture them all in some of the most half-assed torture scenes I've seen from a horror movie in a long while. Which is a really bad sentence to say out loud, but here we are. I think the kicker of this is how lazily Richard Dreyfuss, yes, as in that Richard Dreyfuss from the original Jaws, is slapped in here as the protagonist's grandpa. He pops in for some scenes of staring at the water, he tells the protagonist how to handle being scared and some flashbacks, and then during the credits, as if this somehow makes up for his work in both the original Jaws and this movie, he talks about the importance of shark conservation. Hey, movie? You realize you're part of the problem, right? You can't just make a killer shark movie and come in at the end and say, but actually sharks are in serious danger. No shit! Because movies like yours have kept perpetuating the idea that they're mindless killing machines. This does not wash your hands of what you've done. Look, can we just be done with the killer shark movies? At least until we can have something more interesting than low-rent Jaws knockoffs to make with them? Nope, apparently we're moving on to orcas now. Sharks are out, orcas are in. This is because they came for your boats, isn't it, you coked out Hollywood fucks? When it came to this series of slasher movies, I wasn't all that into the first Strangers movie. It was fine enough. I think it tried to play too much on the we're totally based on true events trope too hard, when it's more that it's based loosely on this attempted burglary that happened in the screenwriter's childhood. That said, the first sequel, Prey by Night, is a really fun 80s throwback. I remember enjoying that a lot when it came out. And then Rennie Harlan showed up. Rennie Harlan, for those who may not know his name, is basically the 7-Up to Michael Bay's Sprite, or Roland Emmerich's Starry. Yeah, I don't know why Pepsi started calling it that instead of Sierra Mist either. Plus, I can never find it anywhere besides in bulk at the grocery store or in certain restaurants that serve Pepsi. It's not all restaurants, because sometimes they just serve Mountain Dew instead. And I can never find it in convenience stores either. They always just have the Mountain Dews instead. So what's the whole point if you weren't going to serve it anywhere, Pepsi? You rename the thing and then you don't serve it anywhere? My point is, Harlan, the director of Cliffhanger, Die Hard 2, Deep Blue Sea, and Cutthroat Island, was who the producers of this franchise decided to bring on for their consecutively shot trilogy about the killers from Strangers. Go ahead. Name them. No, look them up on IMDb and the other tab. What are their names? What are the names of the slashers and Strangers? Do you even remember they had names? Because I sure as hell never do. These low-rent Halloween costumes have less presence than the tree in an elementary school play. When the first one of these came out, I didn't like it, but I also couldn't really hate it either. It was basically just a worse version of that original movie. Meanwhile, part 2, chapter 2, like this is some clown's novella, takes what would be interesting themes, like the PTSD the survivor would have, gotten from the events of that first movie, and the growing mystery of the town where this is all happening, and just farts around for 100 minutes. The actual moments of the girl suffering from PTSD are so poorly handled, you'd think this was written by Colleen Hoover. And meanwhile, we keep flashing back to 2 of the 3 killers as kids, as if we're supposed to care about their backstory for why they kill people. Newsflash, you 3 rejects aren't Michael Myers or Freddy Krueger. You aren't even Puppet Master. Make me give a shit about you first, then maybe we can learn about your tragic backstory. I think at the point I knew I had to include this movie on the list was when the feral hog showed up. Yes, for some godforsaken reason, there's a complete non sequitur of a scene where the protagonist has to deal with a legit feral hog in the woods. And no AR-15 in sight, unfortunately. Though I guess there would be more for 30 to 50 feral hogs. In any case, why? Why is there a feral hog here? Why do we have a scene of her fending off a feral hog in the woods? Fuck if I know. Fuck you. Fuck you. That's why we have a scene of a feral hog in this slasher movie for some reason. Chapter 3 of this nonsense came out in February of 2026, so thankfully, once I take the time to suffer through that this year, I can finally be done with this ill-conceived trilogy. You know, I'm going to be honest, when I watched the Steamboat Willie slasher movie, I knew it was going to be bad, because obviously it was going to be bad. But I actually saw some ideas in it that if they had taken the time to develop, they could have made for a way funnier, better parody. The same will not be said of this slop. In the race to the bottom that is the public domain cartoon character slasher Cashin movie, I have to say that this one's actually worse than Blood and Honey. Don't get me wrong, both Blood and Honey movies are abject garbage. The Bambi one managed to be slightly better than fetid trash, and the Steamboat Willie slasher was also cheap filth. Oh, but this, my friends, is below the bottom of the barrel. We've managed to scrape so low, we broke new ground in suck. For one thing, even in all the other cash-ins, there's at the very least some effort to tie into the source for the parody. It's usually terrible, but that doesn't mean that there wasn't effort. The Blood and Honey movies took place in the 100-Acre Woods. The sequel with Tigger featured him bouncing, and there was a character based on Christopher Robin. Bambi the Reckoning had the novelty of the killer being a mutated deer. It centered on his antagonism with hunters and mankind, and even featured some rabbits akin to Thumper and his family. Hell, even in the Steamboat Willie slasher movie, the backstory for the killer mouse is a Walt Disney pastiche complete with hand-drawn rubber hose-style animation. It's not amazing effort, but there was an attempt, at least. Not for Popeye the Slayer Man. No, the closest you get is a Popeye monster-looking humanoid in a sailor uniform with anchor arm style prosthetics, and the setting is an abandoned spinach cannery that's said to be by an abandoned dockyard. But we never see any waterfront. For fuck's sake, he's a sailor! You couldn't be bothered to set this at a shipyard or on an abandoned ghost ship? Maybe actually include, I don't know, Bluto and Olive Oil or any of the other Popeye characters beyond blink and you'll miss them passing dialogue references? Like, I think one of the teenagers is supposed to be Sweet Pea the baby, but not that anybody would actually notice. Did anybody on this production give anything resembling a fuck? So besides the zero effort to actually make use of their public domain character, the rest of the slasher movie elements weren't any better. Badly done kills, incoherent story, shoddy camera work, no effort sound mixing and editing. And I know quality character writing and acting isn't expected out of this genre, but even for the low standards of cheap cash-in slasher movies, this cast is basically texting it in. They couldn't even phone it in like professional actor Kevin James. I think part of the reason I don't get into horror as a genre is because when it's not taking itself seriously enough, we get shit like this. If you're gonna be a cheap cash-in at the very least, fucking try a little. At least you tried. Speaking of trying a little, this is a very special category for a very special movie. It's called At Least You Tried. Because like the Simpsons gif and cake, at least they tried to take on an important issue. They just sucked at it. I think one of the issues that's become a galvanizing point for me as I've gotten older is housing and how we treat the unhoused. for why I use that terminology, I turn you to an old Carlin bit.
I'll tell you what they ought to do about homelessness. First thing, change the name of it. Change the name of the condition. It's not homelessness, it's houselessness. It's houses these people need. A home is an abstract idea. A home is a setting. It's a state of mind. These people need houses, physical, tangible structures. But where are you going to put them? Where are you going to build them? Nobody wants you to build low-cost housing near their house. People don't want it near them. We got something in this country, you've heard of it, it's called NIMBY, N-I-M-B-Y. Not in my backyard.
I'm kind of glad more people have caught on to this line of rhetoric, even if George wasn't necessarily being 100% serious about it, or the originator of why we tend to use the term unhoused these days instead of homeless. Because he is right that it's not about them not having a home. It's about them needing a literal house, a roof over their head, a domicile, a place to protect them from the elements. Home is more of a concept, a feeling, or a state of mind. We need tangible residences to provide these people. And the worst part is, we could already be providing it. We, or rather, the systems we have in place, just don't wanna. I'll save you my tirade, but suffice to say, the mindset of people don't deserve housing unless they earn it is a poison that's racked our species for far too long. And it's far past time that we stop making housing a commodity to make the already wealthy even wealthier, and just allow housing to exist for its own sake, because we as humans need it to survive. So, when you have a movie that wants to tackle the issues facing unhoused people, there's so much to consider. The various reasons people become unhoused, such as mental health, domestic violence, financial strife, addiction, and the whole lack of a safety net, be it familial or communal. You need to look at the resources that may help unhoused people and organizations that are willing to work with them, the holes and cracks that people can fall through, and particularly the struggles they face from an uncaring or at least uninterested public to the bureaucratic hoops on top of their own demons they have to jump through. This movie does none of that. In fact, this movie is less of a movie and more of an after-school special on the unhoused. It has all the trappings: surface-level understanding of the issue, a melodramatic portrayal of the problem, cartoonishly over-the-top villains, and an unearned happy ending for everybody while never actually solving any of the problems. And that's not even the half of this movie's issues. I mean, for one thing, you make a movie addressing the issues facing unhoused people in 2025, and there's not a single mention of how disproportionately queer youth are affected. And they had the chance to do it too. There's a kid who left a household ran by an abusive alcoholic father, and the protagonist is a foster kid who was tossed out after graduating high school. Like, literally immediately graduating high school, too. Either or both of those characters could have been LGBTQIA2S+ in some way, and have that factor into how they became unhoused. But the movie doesn't address queerness and the unhoused and the correlation between them at all. Admittedly, the solution side of things is a lot more mixed. The big things that save the day are a local church, the one kid's mom, and the Salvation Army. Who, might I add, probably wouldn't have been so helpful if any of the main characters were openly queer. But sure, let's give the glorified would-be church a free shout-out. Them being featured would definitely explain the lack of queer representation, though. There's mentions of shelters, but the characters don't go to one because they'd get split up between two shelters, and the boy refused to have them not all be in the same place. But no mention of HUD assistance or many of the other local or state programs that could help them. There's no mention of non-religious or even non-Christian organizations that assist the unhoused. And ultimately, the movie doesn't even call out the biggest solution that could help people: free or at least widely available low-cost housing with access to the support they could need for what led them to lose housing in the first place. Hell, there's more effort to put into William Baldwin being absolutely convinced that the land where these people have set up an encampment is prime real estate, and it will save his job and help offset his gambling debts, than there is on addressing where and how to find real solutions to why people are in unhoused situations to begin with. There's more time dedicated to 3 overgrown high school bullies roving the streets harassing the main characters than there is on calling out the not in my backyard mentality that so many people take when it comes to setting up social services and safety nets for people in need. This movie's priorities are not in the right place. I think the big kicker, though, is at the end of the movie, the whole cast comes out and tries to sell us on the No Address Initiative to help end homelessness.
Fuck you. Fuck you. Fuck you forever. Fuck yourselves. Go fuck yourselves, you fucks.
This movie didn't even scratch the surface on the issue or its many related issues, but it wants you to give your time and money to a nonprofit in its name to solve it. You don't get to do that. You can't just astroturf a social movement to pat yourselves on the back for your movie that didn't even meaningfully address the topic. That last bit especially put this movie on this list. Nothing makes a movie more reprehensible than thinking they can astroturf a social movement to go along with it. That's the kind of shit the God's Not Dead movies pulled. If these filmmakers wanted me to take them seriously, they'd be ending the movie demanding housing as a protected legal right instead of just busking as another feckless 501c. More like traction movie. The only thing the last 2 movies had in common were they were shitty action movies. Just shitty in wildly different ways. Oh, goody goody gumdrops, 2 of my most favorite people in the world, Marky Mark and Mel Bigotson. You know, long before the term cancel culture was even a thing, the revelation of Mel Gibson as a violent, abusive, bigoted piece of shit actually managed to make him a pariah where he had once been considered a golden boy. You know, there were consequences to him being an awful person, at least, publicly. That didn't last very long because Hollywood, just like any other industry with wealth, power, and influence, ultimately does not care how big of a piece of shit you are. You're only a true pariah if you ever threaten the profits. So inevitably, Gibson was allowed back into acting and directing roles like nothing had happened, and people just went along with it like nothing had happened. And last year gave us his latest outing with another noted piece of shit nobody should have to put up with, and yet we still do for some reason. Murky fucking Mark Wahlberg. Setting aside the fact that the main 2 people involved in this movie are just awful human garbage, the movie itself is no better than they are. It had potential from the premise. Apparently, it even started out on the blacklist. This is a collection of buzzworthy, unproduced screenplays that gets shared around every year by producers in the system. But whatever was in that original script is absolutely ruined by making Topher Grace be this annoying asswipe whinging his way through the whole movie. Marky Mark's cloying attempts at menace through his thick Southie accent, and Gibson apparently forgetting how to pace a good thriller. This movie is an absolute chore to sit through. If it's your in-flight movie, you're better off jumping without a parachute. And unfortunately, this movie managed to make back its budget at the least, making it just enough of a success for us to be stuck with these 2 assholes for the foreseeable future. Fuck me. You know what's a good action movie? Die Hard. It at the very least managed to create an entire subgenre of action movies in its wake, many of which were also just as good, if not better. And hell, it's a simple premise too. It's a bottle movie of a solo hero against a team of villains holding hostages. You almost have to try to mess up when you're doing a Die Hard premise. So what's this movie's excuse? Yes, in the long line of Die Hard likes, Cleaner is probably one of, if not the closest to the original in terms of its setting, but in its execution completely bungles every other aspect. Our hero doesn't actively become involved in the plot until halfway through the movie, spending the first act suspended on the outside of the building on a window cleaner's scaffolding instead. But it's okay, once she actually does get inside the building, she'll totally kind of kick a little ass. As a treat. It doesn't help that Cleaner pulls the same move that the MCU did with their villains, the Flag Smashers, in Falcon and the Winter Soldier, where they are correct in targeting the wealthy for hurting people in the name of profit, but in order to keep them from being sympathetic and viewed as being correct by the audience, they have to just start killing people and enjoying it out of nowhere. In fact, this movie adds in the extra step of having the lead terrorist be betrayed by his second in command, who is way more bloodthirsty, in order to justify Daisy Ridley being okay to kill them and save the hostages, when you never even needed the eco-terrorist angle in the first place. You basically just wasted our time making everyone less sympathetic when you could have just cut to the chase and had this be about a deranged mercenary willing to kill people at this office building. Oh, and let's not forget the best part. You see, Daisy Ridley has a brother who's an adult on the autism spectrum, and oh boy, does it make me yearn for the stellar representation of Sheldon Cooper or the Good Doctor. I can't tell you how tired I am that filmmakers and producers are still relying on half-assed, outdated tropes and mannerisms to depict people on the spectrum. My entire adult life has been seeing myself be depicted as essentially either a clown to be laughed at or a sob story for people who otherwise never would give a shit about me. Is it too much to ask filmmakers to try and give a shit? One shit, me lord. Just one shit. Could you give one shit, me lord, for the autistic? And yet, the autistic rep here has nothing on my worst of the year pick. Worst movie of 2025. Like with the best movie, the worst movie of the year can sometimes be something you see very early on or something that pops up right towards the end of the year. Sometimes they try to be the big blockbuster or the big crowd pleaser event of the year, a critical darling, or awards bait that just fails spectacularly. Sometimes it's a bad idea from conception, sometimes it's a series of bad decisions being made by producers, directors, writers, and or actors. Whatever the case, here was the worst thing I saw in 2025. You know, some movies feel almost tailor-made to be against you. They have everything you cannot stand featured on screen. My pick in 2024 for worst movie, Reagan, was a bit of that. It was a biopic that was less about historical accuracy and entirely about mythologizing and propagandizing one of our nation's worst presidents. And we have the statistics to back that up. This year's pick is a lot more personal, though, because it's a movie about a boy on the autism spectrum. Except not really, it's more about his shitty alcoholic father. And instead of the story being about said boy, Austin, coming to accept himself for who he is, whether his family does or not, It's about how he's fucking magic and cured his dad's alcoholism with a little extra help from Jesus. The most we get with Austin in terms of personality or character development is he has a hyperfixation on movies, specifically Star Wars, and the main negative outburst we see from him is met with restraining him and taking him to a psych hospital where he gets shot up with what I can only hope is a sedative and held for an unlisted length of time that included Christmas, after which he is never shown to have a negative outburst again and acts like nothing happened. Even if that's what happened in their lives or how they remembered it, it's not something I would want to have depicted on film for eternity for people to see. But I'm also not a shitty parent. The thing is, I would like to have known more about Austin himself, but every time I tried to look up the family, the most readily available information I could get is from the dad's book and interviews with Christian news outlets talking about their faith. So, as far as I can tell, everything about this family only exists to peddle books to evangelicals. Which would definitely explain why this movie came courtesy of the director of constant Christsploitation slop, Joseph Gunn. No relation to James, not that either would want that. The man who gave us the adaptation of the bullshit book, The Case for Christ, in which Lee Strobel, an atheist, quote unquote, journalist, totally logic and reasoned himself into being Christian, except that any basic level of scrutiny given to Strobel's work makes it completely fall apart and proves him to be just another charlatan and a propagandist. None of this is helped by the most pathetic role yet for washout Zachary Levi, who's gone all in on being as big of a loser on screen as he is off screen. Since Zach's insistence on adhering to his faith and denouncing the evils of vaccines has overtaken his endeavors to actually act, he'll be joining the ranks of other luminaries, such as Dean Cain, Jim Caviezel, and good old Kevin Sorbo, in being the one recognizable name in otherwise worthless Christian propaganda slop made for that one aunt you blocked on Facebook. The real kicker is, even if you take out the abysmal depiction of a kid on the autism spectrum, even if you dropped that this was just more Jesus slop for the church pew grannies, this movie would still be completely unwatchable. Every choice Gunn makes from a filmmaking perspective is the wrong one. For one thing, he forces the kid playing Austin to narrate almost the entirety of the movie, which, no offense to the kid, but having him talk for that long is an assault on my eardrums, especially when the bulk of that narration was punch-up jokes to try and get laughs out of the audience. I don't think I even cracked a smile. Narration is not this kid's strong suit, and it isn't even necessary to the movie. It adds nothing. It's just there. It's just constant noise. When the movie isn't overly narrated, its pacing is garbage. The editing is all over the goddamn place and stops and starts like a teenager learning to drive for the first time. There's an entirely useless imaginary friend character for Zach Levi whose rules for interacting with the world around him make absolutely no sense whatsoever and is never actively addressed as its own issue in the movie at all, except to make a passing reference to it as a joke. And the worst of it all is I know exactly who this movie is for.
These are people of the land, the common clay of the New West. You know, morons.
In my decade plus of reviewing movies, I've tried to improve and do better about only judging the filmmakers and the films themselves and not critiquing audiences. Especially since What you like is always subjective. But genuinely, if you enjoyed this movie, please go watch any of the movies I brought up in my best of 2025 list. K-pop Demon Hunters, Del Toro's Frankenstein, Wake Up Dead Man, The Life of Chuck. Those are all so much better than this. Hell, if you want an inspirational story, I may not be into the genre, but Soul on Fire also came out last year. It's also based on a true story, this time about a young boy who survived a horrific accident and went on to lead a very fulfilling life. It's actually about the boy himself and not the people around him while he's treated as a prop. Features non-washed up actor William H. Macy as longtime St. Louis baseball commentator Jack Buck actually giving a good performance, and the film itself is just a far better made movie than The Unbreakable Kid was. It's not amazing, but if this is your genre, then at least Soul on Fire isn't awful to sit through. What I'm saying is, you don't have to put up with slop like this anymore. You have entire libraries of media available to you. You can watch better movies, and you deserve to see better movies. Or maybe you don't. Maybe you think this was the bestest thing ever, and I'm going to hell because I shit-talked the Autistic Kid Loves Jesus movie. What the fuck do I know? There you have it. Those were the worst movies I saw in 2025. I'm not sure what all 2026 will bring with it, but whatever it brings, we'll take it in stride. Until next time, you can always find me at the movies.